They thought she was just an old secretary. But her ID unlocked a vault buried since the Cold War. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories they tried to erase. It began like any other summit morning in Geneva. Dignitaries gathered in the glass-paneled halls of the Paletta Nations. Security teams moved with silent precision. Lanyards were checked, flags displayed, and cameras adjusted. The world's eyes were on General Marcus Beck, set to deliver a historic address on nuclear de-escalation. The broadcast was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp. What no one expected was the appearance of an elderly woman with a faded leather satchel and a face barely remembered. She entered through a side gate, ID badge worn, outdated. It read, Margaret Ellis, civilian liaison. UN, retired. Security glanced at it, scanned her bracelet out of habit, and watched in confusion as the light blinked green. She said nothing. Inside the summit hall, General Beck was rehearsing behind the curtain. The speech was final: global realignment, soft power deterrence, and the burial of all Cold War legacy programs. But as Margaret Ellis moved deeper into the building, the destination wasn't the seating area. IT was Vault 47. A corridor sealed since 1989.2 guards stopped her at the reinforced door. Restricted, one said. Without a word, she held up her wrist. The bracelet she wore, plain, scratched metal, triggered the scanner. Beep. Green. The door opened. What lay beyond was not weapons or blueprints. It was worse: paper, files, names, orders, all bearing the red insignia of a classified operation long thought dead. Sigma Initiative. Surveillance footage shows the moment General Beck received word. He abandoned the stage mid-countdown and raced down 2 flights. Aides followed, confused. Press crews were cut off. Inside the vault, Margaret was already standing by the central case. Open and exposed, Beck stopped cold when he saw her. "Where did you get that bracelet?" he asked. She looked at him. "I was issued it. Same year you were promoted." A long silence. Then Beck turned to his aide. "Clear the summit hall. Cancel everything." "Sir, the live stream, cancel it. Now." The order sent shockwaves through the diplomatic floors. Heads of state were ushered out. Delegates whispered. Live streams cut to static. Margaret Ellis hadn't raised her voice once, but history was now listening. General Beck tried to close the file case. Margaret stopped him. You buried Sigma under a protocol that was never deactivated," she said. "We were protecting national security," he replied. "No," she corrected. "You were protecting yourselves." Hours later, Vault 47 was resealed. But not before multiple copies of its contents were made. And not before Margaret Ellis walked out on her own, passing through layers of confusion, silence, and disbelief. What she took with her wasn't a weapon or a drive. The IT was proof. Proof that secrets don't die quietly. They wait. It didn't take long for whispers to start circulating through the upper ranks. Margaret Ellis's name was absent from modern files. Her clearance long thought expired. Yet her bracelet had unlocked one of the Pentagon's oldest active command points in Europe, Vault 47, decommissioned in 1989 under a silent directive. D9 Omega. Only 7 people had ever signed off on it. Only one was still alive: General Marcus Beck. The summit's cancellation triggered emergency briefings in 3 capitals: Washington, Berlin, London. The official explanation? Unforeseen technical complications. Off the record, panic spread like static through encrypted lines. The intelligence community doesn't like puzzles they didn't create, and Margaret Ellis had just thrown one into their command center. Back in Geneva, Beck stood alone in his temporary quarters, the leather case from the vault laid across his desk. He hadn't opened it since Margaret walked out. Part of him feared what had survived. Another part already knew. There were names inside that file: covert field agents long presumed dead or disappeared. Operations wiped clean from digital memory. One, codenamed Beryl, was redacted across every page, except for a handwritten postscript at the bottom of a debrief form. Handler, me, Margaret Ellis. Beck picked up his encrypted satellite phone. "Give me Director Ames. Level 6. The line clicked. 5 seconds later, A voice came through. She's not supposed to be alive. Beck's tone was flat. She is. And she just walked through Sigma's front door. Silence. Then what does she want? Beck looked toward the case. She said nothing. But she doesn't have to. In a dim operations room beneath Langley, Director Marjorie Ames pulled up a dusty personnel folder. Margaret's file didn't say much, just dates, transfers, and a suspicious 2-year gap in the late 80s marked only as Eastern Service, temporary. Ames stared at the note Beck had forwarded. Vault 47 activated. Barrel protocol surfaced. Summit canceled. She didn't blink. Send the archivist, she ordered, and wake up Gray Team, quietly. Meanwhile, Margaret Ellis didn't go home. Instead, she booked a one-way train ticket east. At the first stop, she changed coats and threw away the bracelet. At the second, she mailed a copy of the Sigma Directive to a former journalist, disbarred, discredited, but still obsessed with Cold War shadows. At the third, she vanished. But not before dropping a small package into a locker at Zurich Central Station. Inside, one microfilm cartridge, one cassette tape, one photo of a younger Beck standing beside a younger Margaret, beneath a military emblem now erased from official history. Across Europe, old networks stirred. Phrases not spoken in decades lit up secure servers. Beryl resurfaced. Omega compromised. And somewhere in Brussels, an elderly man received a message through a burner device buried in his garden. The directive failed. Reassemble. He stared at it for a long time, then stood up, limping, and opened a crate sealed since 1991. Inside were the pieces of a long-dismantled radio and a file labeled Ellis, Watchdog Clearance. By nightfall, 5 embassies had locked down their internal mail systems. A 6th reported a missing courier, and General Beck finally opened the case. Inside, on top of the redacted files, was a note written in Margaret's tight, slanted handwriting. You taught me to bury lies with layers of silence. I've learned to do the opposite. It begins again. The flight from Langley touched down at Geneva's Cointrin Airport under dense cloud cover and heightened security. The man who disembarked didn't wear a name badge or uniform. No entourage, no briefcase. Just a slate gray wool coat, dark gloves, and a sealed courier envelope tucked beneath one arm. They called him the archivist. He wasn't CIA. Not anymore. His clearance wasn't digital. It was generational. A relic from when secrets were filed on paper and memorized by men who knew not to speak them. Director Ames had sent him without a file number, just a phrase. Sigma breach. Ellis active. Beryl uncertain. The archivist made his way through the Paletta nations, past halls still echoing with the aftermath of the summit's collapse. Delegates whispered. Staff stared, but no one dared stop him. General Beck had already cleared space on level 3. Waiting, Beck stood with his arms crossed behind his back when the archivist entered. She's alive, Beck said. The archivist removed his gloves. And still 3 moves ahead, I assume. Beck didn't answer. The archivist placed the envelope on the table. Vault 47 was supposed to stay sealed. What did she take? Beck exhaled. A file. Sigma Initiative. Original schema. Codenames. Her bracelet matched. No override. The archivist's brow twitched. Did she say Beryl? Beck hesitated. No, but she didn't have to. Meanwhile, in a flat outside Zurich, an old reel-to-reel tape recorder played static. A journalist, once jailed for refusing to give up sources, listened to the tape Margaret had sent him. Through the hiss came a voice. Operation Sigma began as a precaution. It ended as a cover-up. Click. The real threat wasn't foreign. It was internal. Click. Beryl was never a ghost. She was the mirror. Back in Geneva, the archivist opened his envelope. Inside were faded documents, many of them bearing Margaret's signature, most of them stamped classified in typewriter ink. He turned one toward Beck. This proves one thing. She didn't just walk away. She was erased. Beck's voice cracked. That's not possible. We had a full retirement file. Clearance revoked. Dead drop burned. The archivist slid a black and white photo across the table. Margaret Ellis, standing beside 2 agents. One of them wearing a sigil not seen since East Berlin, the Watchdog Division. She wasn't part of Sigma, the archivist said. She built it. In Washington, Director Ames received an encrypted update. Archivist confirms structural breach. Watchdog link verified. Level 5 protocol triggered. She turned to her assistant. Activate Protocol K. And wake up Lawson. He's the only one left who worked on Beryl. On a train headed toward the French countryside, Margaret sat alone in the last car. She didn't sleep. She didn't read. Her satchel rested on her knees, one hand looped tightly around the handle. The countryside passed by in blurs. At the next stop, someone would join her. She didn't know who yet, but someone always came when the files moved, especially when the archivist was back in play. By morning, the archivist had issued a level 5 trace order, one that hadn't been used in 34 years. Every piece of microfilm connected to Sigma. Every redacted code linked to Beryl. Every handler name crossed with Margaret Ellis. And in a steel basement 2 floors below, General Beck opened a sealed drawer and removed a photo no one had seen in decades. It was dated 1987. On the back, Beryl, Prague, eyes open. The photograph Beck retrieved was only 4 by 6 inches, black and white, and slightly warped from age. But what it showed was unmistakable. A woman in a long coat standing under a street lamp in Prague's Old Town, 1987. Her posture was tense, her face turned slightly from the camera, but the profile was clear enough. It was Margaret Ellis, but not the version the world had seen at the Geneva summit. This woman was younger, sharper, her hair pinned tight under a beret, her right hand tucked inside the coat, no doubt gripping something metallic. Behind her, partially blurred by motion, stood another figure. Tall, male, unidentified. On the back, someone had scribbled a message in red pencil. Beryl, eyes open. 1 hour before contact. Beck handed the photo to the archivist, who studied it silently. This was before Sigma was official, he murmured. She was running freelance ops? Beck shook his head. No one was running her. That's what made her dangerous. Margaret never needed clearance. She was the clearance. The archivist traced his finger along the blurred figure behind her. If this is who I think it is, then we need Lawson. Now. Meanwhile, in a nondescript home in rural Maryland, a landline rang twice before it was picked up. A groggy voice answered. Lawson. On the other end, Director Ames didn't waste time. Watchdog is active again. The line went dead for 3 seconds. Then, Ellis. She surfaced in Geneva. Lawson swore under his breath. I'll need access to Prague archives. And the original Beryl map. They're still sealed under Omega lock. Lawson didn't hesitate. Then unseal them. In the back of a cab outside Lyon, Margaret sat with her satchel open. Inside, beside the file she had taken from Vault 47, was a map, a photocopy so old it had yellowed. It was hand-drawn, with notes in 2 different styles of handwriting. One belonged to her. The other had been dead for 30 years. The map detailed something called Node 12, a Cold War-era communications tap point buried under the city's catacombs. Used once, then shut down. It wasn't on any modern record. Only those who had been there remembered. Margaret had drawn a red circle around it and underlined a name, Kestrel. Back in Geneva, the archivist opened a box marked Arch 39/PRG. Inside, rolls of undeveloped film, cipher sheets, and a sealed envelope labeled, in case of reactivation. He opened it. Inside were 3 things. A list of asset names with clearance codes, most crossed out. A coded directive beginning with, if Beryl is seen, proceed to trace Tier 7. And a final line, written in pen, unlike the rest. She doesn't need us to find her. She's already where she needs to be. The archivist sat back. Lawson was right, he said. Beck nodded. She's not trying to hide. No, the archivist replied. She's trying to wake something up. At midnight, in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath Lyon, a motion sensor flickered on. A steel door hissed open. Margaret Ellis stepped through, her footsteps echoing. She paused at an old access panel and entered a code no one had used in decades. 4 to 7, 1E. A mechanical click followed, and the lights came on. Inside, rows of silent servers, dust-covered terminals, and a single rotary dial phone. She picked up the handset, dialed, waited, then whispered, "This is Kestrel. Sigma is broken. Beryl has eyes." The line went dead, and 2 hours later, across the Atlantic, Lawson received a message on an old pager. Node 12 activated. Kestrel alive. Beryl not contained. He stood up, and for the first time in 30 years, opened the black case under his bed. Inside, a revolver, a badge, and an ID card with one word: Handler. The black case hadn't seen daylight since the Berlin Wall fell. The velvet lining still cradled the weapon and ID like a time capsule no one dared disturb. But Lawson wasn't trembling as he strapped on the old leather holster. He was focused, calm, already processing probabilities like a machine rebooting after decades of sleep. He slipped the Handler ID into his coat and walked out into the Maryland dawn. By the time the sun fully broke the horizon, Lawson had accessed a private hangar near Quantico. A jet, unmarked and silent, waited on the tarmac. Destination, Lion. Margaret Ellis had called herself Kestrel, which meant the protocol they buried in 1987 was no longer dormant. It was awake and watching. In Langley, Director Ames paced the 7th-floor operations room. Sigma had always been a phantom case, a Cold War nightmare wrapped in myth. Watchdog Division, Node 12, the Beryl Manifest. They were remnants of an intelligence era built on whispers and plausible deniability. And now it was all unraveling. She stared at the latest report, Node 12 online. Operator ID matched. Confirmed, Margaret Ellis. Ames turned to her aide. Activate protocol Blackbird. The aide froze. Ma'am, that would override Homeland Command. Ames didn't blink. I know. Meanwhile, deep beneath Lion, Margaret moved through Node 12's cold corridors. Lights flickered to life as she passed. A system built for analog, running smoother than digital ever could. At the central hub, a cracked monitor blinked blue. Trace signal, locked. Target, Beryl, unknown. She typed the code. The screen refreshed. A waveform began pulsing. Slow, erratic. She spoke aloud. Someone's listening. She knew Lawson would be en route. She also knew he wouldn't come alone. The real question wasn't who would arrive first. It was who still believed in the original Sigma oath. Most didn't, but the ones who did, they were the problem. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Lawson reviewed the last live photo of Margaret taken at Geneva. He enlarged the bracelet on her wrist, the one that opened Vault 47. It wasn't just a passkey. It was a beacon. The metal casing had been modified to send a low-frequency signal, but only once every 84 hours. Meaning, someone else might be following it too. He opened his case and retrieved a faded copy of the Beryl command tree. A network of embedded assets, most presumed dead or neutralized. But one name at the bottom still had no X beside it. Echo. In a listening post buried beneath a data center in Belgium, an encrypted line burst to life for the first time in 33 years. A man in a brown wool sweater, with no known address or digital footprint, lifted a dusty receiver. He listened, did not speak. Then finally, "She's moving." He hung up, walked to a cabinet, unlocked a drawer labeled Cold Rain, pulled out a satellite phone, dialed a number he hadn't used since 1992. All lines are active. Tell Echo Beryl's awake. Back in Node 12, Margaret opened the file she had taken from Vault 47. Inside were handwritten notes in code only she and 3 others could read. One of them was dead. One had betrayed her. The last one was Lawson. She left a post-it note on the terminal screen. He'll understand this language. Then she walked deeper into the tunnels, her boots echoing against concrete, past sealed doors marked with only numbers. Room 9, Room 11, Room 13. She paused. Room 12 was missing. Just a blank wall. She smiled slightly. Still playing games, are we? Then placed her hand on the concrete. It beeped and opened. Inside was a chair and a file cabinet. She sat, waited. Above ground, the world had no idea it had just lost track of one of its oldest operatives. But Margaret Ellis had never needed a GPS. She was always right where history forgot to look. In a nameless facility hidden beneath the Swiss Alps, a cold blue light pulsed in rhythm with a forgotten algorithm. It was there that Echo, or rather, the man once known as Echo, received the activation code through a data stream older than the internet itself. A code that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. K12.eyes.active.query. Beryl? He stared at the message. The world had moved on. Governments had changed. Files had burned. But if Kestrel was online and Beryl had surfaced, then he wasn't retired anymore. He picked up a small transmitter, typed only 3 words. Node 12 confirmed. Then he stood, slowly, like his joints were remembering how to be useful again. He unlocked a drawer, revealing a worn badge, a disassembled pistol, and a flash drive labeled Ellis. It was time. Back in Lyon, Lawson arrived at the station just after sunrise. He moved without urgency, blending into the commuters, but inside his mind was a storm. He replayed every interaction with Margaret Ellis from decades ago. Training sessions, covert briefings, that one mission in Prague, the one that never made it into official reports. The way she'd vanished afterward without a trace. He exited the station and took a cab to the outskirts of the city. There, beneath a forgotten tram tunnel, the entrance to Node 12 lay hidden behind a rusted maintenance door. He opened it with an old key and descended. Inside Node 12, Margaret sat in the sealed room 12, flipping through paper files. She wasn't hiding. She was curating, sorting what to reveal and what to bury again. She didn't look up when Lawson entered. "Close the door," she said quietly. He did. "Why now?" he asked. Margaret didn't smile. "Because someone finally tried to erase us completely and failed." Lawson nodded toward the cabinet. "Is Beryl in there?" Margaret reached into her satchel, pulled out a cassette tape. "No," she said. "Beryl is in here." Lawson stepped forward, stunned. "It survived." "Not just survived," she said. "It adapted." Meanwhile, at Langley, Director Ames received an intercepted signal from Switzerland. A triangulated ping. Not encrypted, just a location and a code name. Echo. Ames stood so fast her chair toppled over. Scramble satellite Zulu 9. Redirect NSA passive taps to French civilian infrastructure. Her aide hesitated. "Ma'am, that would trigger cross-border protocols. Then break them." In Zurich, a traffic camera blinked twice. In Berlin, a public Wi-Fi node shut down for 3 minutes. In Madrid, a pension fund server received an upload of unknown origin. Echo was back, inside Node 12. Lawson inserted the cassette into a battered player. The reel began to turn. A voice came through. Margaret's voice. But from 1989. "If this is being played, then Watchdog has failed. Sigma is compromised. And Beryl is not alone." Lawson turned to her. "You knew this day would come." She met his eyes. "I didn't know when. Only that the system always collapses on its creators." On the other side of the world, Echo made his way toward an abandoned NATO relay station in Austria. He had one goal, not to protect secrets, but to unbury them. In Washington, Ames received one final alert. Node 12 breached. Cassette verified. Echo inbound. She stared at the words for a long time, then whispered, "We should have burned the entire program." The directive had been dormant for 31 years. Protocol, burn. Its purpose was simple. If Sigma assets reactivated under unverified command, erase all digital trails, eliminate active agents, and neutralize compromised nodes. Director Ames stood in the heart of Langley's sub-basement command tier, her finger hovering over the biometric pad. Her aide, voice trembling, asked the question everyone avoided. "Do we really think they've turned against us?" Ames didn't answer directly. She pressed her thumb down. The red light blinked once, then glowed solid. Burn protocol, initiated. In the French countryside, Margaret Ellis felt the shift before the signal arrived. Node 12 server sputtered. One terminal crackled with static. She rose from the steel chair, paced to the main board, and watched as files began disappearing, one by one, into digital oblivion. She whispered. They pulled the kill cord. Lawson stood behind her, jaw clenched. "Can we stop it?" Margaret pointed to the analog console in the corner. Not digitally. Then handed him the cassette. You're the last handler. Get this to the world. He didn't hesitate. She turned back to the console and began pulling wires. Across Europe, dormant assets stirred. In Krakow, a retired agent opened a hollowed-out violin case. In Trieste, a nun who once led psychological operations folded her habit into a drawer, revealing a Sigma insignia tattooed on her shoulder. In Oslo, a woman dialed a number etched into a church pew. Each of them heard the same line. Burn is active. Kestrel compromised. Echo en route. None of them were surprised. Meanwhile, Echo had arrived at the NATO relay station in Austria. The site had long since been decommissioned, but its underground systems still pulsed with occasional backup power. He didn't come to hide. He came to broadcast. From his pocket, he removed a glass ampoule. Inside it, a microdot containing Beryl's root protocol, complete with every name buried since 1974. He inserted it into the reader. Typed a line. Sigma is not broken. It was betrayed. Then hit send. Back in Langley, alarms blared. We have a breach, Ames's aide said. Where? Everywhere. Screens began to flood with names. Photos. Surveillance logs once thought destroyed. Ames realized too late. Burn had failed. Because the files were never gone. They'd just been buried where only those who remember could find them. In Lyon, Margaret watched the last light on node 12 flicker and die. She turned to Lawson, handed him a folded paper. It was the original Beryl activation code. Use this, she said. But where will you go? She smiled. I never stopped being everywhere. As the power went out, Lawson climbed the access shaft. Above ground, a military drone hovered, uncertain whether to strike. He held up the cassette. If you drop fire, he muttered, you burn the truth too. The drone backed off. For now. And beneath the streets of Lyon, in a tunnel choked with silence and shadow, Margaret Ellis removed her coat, folded it neatly, and laid it beside the old rotary phone. She sat once more in room 12, alone, waiting, listening, and the walls, like the files, remembered. The cassette arrived in Washington wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address, just the words. To be opened only when the lie becomes too heavy. Lawson didn't deliver it through official channels. He bypassed the agency, the military, and every government archive. Instead, he walked into a podcast studio. The host, a former intelligence reporter with a reputation for unearthing inconvenient truths, looked stunned as Lawson placed the cassette on the table. This, Lawson said, will rewrite the Cold War. The host hesitated. What's on it? Everything we weren't supposed to survive. And then, live to 2.3 million subscribers, they played the tape. The world didn't erupt. Not right away. But threads began to unravel. Archive documents were reopened. Congressional hearings convened. A senator from Vermont demanded an investigation into Project Beryl. Families of missing intelligence officers reached out to news outlets. Anonymous sources began feeding new leaks into public forums. The story of Sigma didn't make the front page, but it never left the second. And one name appeared again and again in quiet government memos. Margaret Ellis. Kestrel. Deceased. In Langley, Director Ames was reassigned, formally for health reasons, but everyone knew why. Her replacement ordered a quiet review of all phantom protocols. Node 12 was decommissioned again. Only this time, cameras were installed. But no one ever saw Margaret leave, and the door to room 12 remained sealed. Lawson disappeared after the broadcast. Some said he fled to Europe. Others believed he was silenced. But a postcard showed up at the archivist's desk 3 months later. No return address, just a photo. Margaret Ellis on a bench overlooking the Black Sea, her face half lit by sunset. On the back, the truth doesn't die. It changes clothes. And in an abandoned church in Prague, a woman lit a candle. She wore a bracelet with a faint red glow. As the bell tolled, she whispered, "The file they buried is still alive," then walked out the front door. The world moved on. But in every intelligence agency, there now existed a new protocol. If Beryl activates, find Kestrel. and hope she's still on our side. Military medal. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think about what's buried, about what's forgotten, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it ticks softly in the silence. Bell subscribe for more untold stories from the shadows. Round Pushpin, where you watching from? Let us know below.